father ruined my childhood. Not because he drank, not because he hit me, not because he ever walked out and failed to come back. He ruined it because he made it impossible to be normal. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, on a street where people waved from driveways, borrowed ladders without asking too many questions, and left garage doors open on Saturday mornings. It should have been the easiest place in the world to be a kid. But I was Frank Hayes' son. By the time I was 12, the children on our block had stopped calling him Mr. Hayes. They called him Crazy Frank. The name started after my 10th birthday party. 6 boys from my class had come over, which felt like a small miracle. My mother had set out paper plates and a chocolate cake. For almost an hour, I thought we might look like every other family on the street. Then my father walked out of the garage. Greg Turner, our neighbor, had parked his minivan too close to the end of our driveway while dropping off his son. It was barely there for a minute. My father pointed at it and said, "Move the van." Greg laughed. "I'm just dropping him off, Frank." "Move it, now." Everyone stopped. My father did not raise his voice. He rarely had to. He just stood there with a shop rag in one hand and waited until Greg got back into the van. One of the boys whispered, "What's wrong with your dad?" By Monday, everyone at school knew. After that, fewer kids came over. Then, none did. It was not only the birthday party, it was everything. On Halloween, my father would not let children step onto our porch. He stood at the door with the candy bowl and made them wait on the sidewalk. When delivery drivers came, he watched from behind the curtain until they left. If an unfamiliar car stopped in front of our house, he stepped outside and asked who they were looking for. At cookouts, he checked propane tanks. At Christmas, he stared at extension cords. In other people's kitchens, his eyes went to outlets before faces. I did not hate my father because he was poor. He was not. I did not hate him because he failed. He worked hard, paid the bills, and never missed the things a father was supposed to provide. I hated him because he made me carry his strangeness everywhere I went. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a little after 4. "Mr. Hayes?" "Yes?" "This is Riverside Medical Center. Your father was admitted after a fall at home. He's stable, but we'd like a family member to come." I was sitting in my truck outside a grocery store, staring at a bag of melting ice cream on the passenger seat. "Is he conscious?" "Yes." A short pause. "He's been asking questions about the wiring in his room." I closed my eyes. Of course he had. "I'll be there soon," I said. The drive took 38 minutes. I know because I watched the clock more than the road. At a red light, I caught myself gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I was 40 years old, with a wife, a son, a mortgage, and gray starting at my temples. Still, part of me wanted to keep driving past the hospital, not because I wanted him hurt, because I knew what would happen when I walked in. Some nurse would be uncomfortable. Some maintenance worker would be annoyed. My father would be sitting there, bruised and stubborn, pointing out something no one else had noticed, and I would feel 10 years old again. On the 4th floor, I heard his voice before I reached the room. "No," a nurse answered, patient but tired. "Mr. Hayes, maintenance has already looked at it." "They should look again." "The outlet is fine." "There doesn't have to be a problem yet." I stopped outside the door. There he was, still himself, still making people uneasy. The nurse stepped into the hallway and saw me.
"You must be his son."
I nodded. She gave me a small, careful smile. "He's very concerned about safety." I had heard versions of that sentence my entire life. I looked past her through the half-open door. My father was sitting upright in bed, a bruise darkening one side of his face, his left wrist wrapped in a temporary splint. He was not looking at the television. He was not looking at the IV line. He was staring at the wall outlet behind the bed. Across the room, Owen wandered over to the hospital window, pressing both hands against the glass as he watched a helicopter lift off from the rooftop pad. My father looked away from the outlet for the first time since I'd arrived. He watched Owen quietly, longer than he watched anyone else. "He's getting tall," he said. I glanced at my son. "Kids do that." My father nodded. "Yeah." Then he looked back at the outlet, as though he'd already said more than he intended. For a moment, I felt the same old embarrassment rise in me, sharp and familiar. I still did not understand why he had to be that man. I don't remember a single Halloween from my childhood. I remember my father. The neighborhood always came alive before sunset, porches filled with carved pumpkins, fake spiderwebs hung from bushes. Parents gathered at the ends of driveways with coffee cups in their hands, while children ran from house to house, laughing loudly enough for the entire street to hear. Every porch welcomed them, except ours. My father insisted they stay on the sidewalk. He never raised his voice, one family at a time. "If you're wearing a long costume, keep it away from the candle. Don't run on the steps." Most children listened. Most parents smiled politely. Then they hurried away to the next house. By the following Monday, everyone at school had another story about my father. He wouldn't even let us stand on his porch. "My mom says your dad thinks he's a police officer. My brother says your dad's crazy." The older I got, the less I argued. It was impossible to defend someone who never seemed interested in defending himself. Christmas wasn't any better. Our street held a decorating contest every December. People spent entire weekends hanging lights across rooftops and wrapping tree trunks in colored strands that could probably be seen from space. One Saturday afternoon, I looked out my bedroom window and saw my father walking across the street carrying a ladder. For one hopeful second, I thought he was finally going to help somebody. Instead, he knocked on the Petersons' front door. Mr. Peterson answered with a mug of coffee in one hand. My father pointed at the extension cord running across their front yard. "That cord isn't rated for outdoor use." Mr. Peterson laughed. "It'll be fine." "It won't. We've used it for years. You've been lucky for years." The conversation ended exactly the way most conversations with my father ended. Mr. Peterson frowned. My father walked home. The next day, the cord was gone. Mr. Peterson never thanked him. As far as I knew, my father never expected him to. Summer meant cookouts. Every family on our block seemed to own the same black grill with the same bag of charcoal sitting underneath it. One 4th of July, the Turners invited nearly everyone on the street into their backyard. Everyone except us. My mother convinced my father to stop by anyway. "We'll stay for 20 minutes, she whispered while straightening his shirt collar. We lasted less than 5. Mr. Turner had placed his propane grill against the wooden fence because it gave everyone more room to sit. Before anyone had taken a bite of food, my father walked over, shut off the burner, and rolled the grill 3 feet into the yard. "What are you doing?" Mr. Turner snapped. "It's too close to the fence." "We've always put it there." "You shouldn't." "You don't get to tell me what to do in my own backyard." "No," my father replied quietly. "Fire does." Nobody spoke after that. My mother set down her paper plate. "We're leaving," she said softly. The ride home was silent. I stared out the passenger window, wishing we had never gone. The following week, 2 boys at school blocked my locker. "Hey," one of them grinned. "Here comes Crazy Frank's kid." I swung first, not because I thought I could win, because I was tired. Tired of pretending I didn't hear them, tired of pretending it didn't matter. The principal suspended me for 2 days. When my father picked me up, he didn't ask why I fought. He simply said, "Violence solves less than people think." I looked out the window and answered without looking at him. "So does talking." Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive home. By the time I turned 18, I had made one promise to myself. I would leave. I would go somewhere nobody knew Frank Hayes, somewhere nobody had ever heard the words, Crazy Frank. The morning I packed my truck for college, my father carried my last box out to the driveway. He set it in the bed of the truck, closed the tailgate, and checked twice to make sure the latch had locked. That was the closest thing to a goodbye either of us managed. I climbed behind the wheel without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I could still see him standing in the driveway, hands in his jacket pockets, watching until I disappeared around the corner. At the time, I believed I was leaving the strangest man I had ever known behind. I had no idea that, in ways I didn't yet understand, I was taking him with me. My father left the hospital 3 days later. The doctor was polite about it. "Mr. Hayes is recovering well," she told me. But at his age, another fall could be much more serious. We'd feel better if someone stayed with him for a while. My father answered before I could. "I've lived alone for 17 years. The doctor smiled. "And we'd like you to keep doing that, for a few more." He didn't argue after that. He simply looked out the window as though the conversation no longer involved him. Laura suggested converting the small guest house behind our home into a temporary place for him. "It'll give him some independence," she said, "and give us some distance." It sounded reasonable, at least until he arrived. He hadn't been there 10 minutes before he disappeared. Laura found him in the garage. He wasn't looking through boxes or deciding where to unpack. He was crouching beside Owen's bicycle. "What is he doing?" I asked. Laura shrugged. "I don't think he knows we're watching." My father lifted the front wheel off the ground and spun it slowly. Then he squeezed both brake levers. He frowned. Without saying a word, he carried the bicycle onto the workbench. "Dad?" No answer. "Dad!" He finally looked up. "The front brake pads are almost gone." "So?" "So they'll need replacing." "They still work." "For now." He reached into the old toolbox I kept on the shelf and began removing the wheel. I could feel the irritation building in my chest. "Owen rode that bike yesterday." "I know." "And nothing happened." My father nodded once. "That's usually how yesterday works." I stared at him. He went back to work. 40 minutes later, he rolled the bicycle back into the driveway. The brake pads had been replaced. The chain had been cleaned. He had tightened 2 loose spokes I hadn't even known were loose. Owen came outside carrying a basketball. "My bike looks different." My father handed it to him. "Try the brakes." Owen rode halfway down the driveway before stopping. "Whoa," he smiled. "They're better." My father only nodded. "They're supposed to be." Then he walked back inside. No praise, no smile, no "you're welcome." Just another job finished. That evening, I found him walking through the guest house with a small notebook. He stopped in front of the smoke detector, looked up for a few seconds, then wrote something down. Next, he checked the fire extinguisher hanging beside the kitchen door, then the water heater, then the electrical panel. He wasn't searching. He was making a list. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Keeping track." "Of what?" He showed me the notebook. Smoke detector. Battery replaced. March. Fire extinguisher. Inspection due. October. Water heater. Installed. 2017. Extension cord in storage. Replace before winter. I handed the notebook back. "You know you don't have to inspect everything." "I know." "But you're going to anyway." "Yes." He said it as calmly as someone confirming tomorrow's weather. There wasn't the slightest hint that he found his own behavior unusual. The day before that, he bought Owen a new bicycle helmet without asking me. Owen's old helmet was fine. It had a few scratches, but nothing serious. My father set the new one on the kitchen counter like it was not up for discussion. He needs this one. I picked it up and looked at the price tag. Dad, his helmet is fine. It's been dropped. It's a kid's helmet. Of course it's been dropped. Then it's done its job once. Laura looked at me, then at him. Martin, he only rides in the driveway. My father did not raise his voice. The ground doesn't get softer because it's close to the house. I looked toward the back door. Why? He said the battery shouldn't stay plugged in overnight. Laura looked at me. I pushed my chair back. Dad! He was sitting on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The charger shuts off automatically, I said. He nodded. Usually? You've got to stop doing this. Doing what? Looking for something that's wrong every single day. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. I'm looking for things before they become wrong. Neither of us spoke after that. Later that evening, Owen found me in the backyard while I was putting the cover over the grill. He looked toward the guest house where my father was replacing the batteries and a flashlight he had found in one of my drawers. Dad? Yeah. Why is Grandpa always angry? I looked across the yard. My father wasn't angry. He wasn't even talking. He was simply sitting alone beneath the porch light, carefully testing the flashlight before placing it back inside the drawer. I had spent my whole life trying to answer that question. The only answer I had ever found was the same one I'd been giving myself since I was a boy. He's always been that way. By the second week, my father had settled into a routine. Every morning he made the same breakfast: black coffee, 2 slices of toast, 1 boiled egg. After that, he walked slowly around to the guest house, checking things most people never thought about. The latch on the back gate, the batteries in the flashlight, the expiration date on the fire extinguisher, the weather stripping around the kitchen door. He never announced what he was doing. He simply did it. I tried to ignore it. Some days I managed. Most days I didn't. Saturday afternoon brought the entire neighborhood outside. The weather had finally cooled enough that people weren't hiding inside their air-conditioned houses anymore. Lawnmowers buzzed in the distance. Someone was washing a pickup truck across the street. Children rode bicycles up and down the sidewalk. Next door, Greg Turner and his wife were setting up for their daughter's birthday party. Colorful balloons were tied to the fence. A folding table held wrapped presents. 2 propane grills stood side by side near the wooden privacy fence that separated their yard from ours. Laura looked over from the patio. They're expecting almost 30 people. I nodded. So we should probably stay out of the way. That had been my plan. Unfortunately, my father had one of his own. He stood quietly beside the kitchen window, watching the Turners' backyard. Not staring, observing. I noticed because he hadn't touched his coffee in several minutes. What? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, That extension cord. I looked. An orange outdoor extension cord ran across the grass from the garage to a speaker near the patio. It looks fine. He kept watching. A few seconds later, one of the older boys dragged a folding chair across the lawn. The metal leg caught the cord and pinned it firmly against the concrete walkway. My father set down his coffee. Dad? He was already walking toward the back door. I followed. By the time I reached the fence, he had stepped into Greg Turner's yard. Greg looked up and smiled politely. Hey, Frank. My father pointed toward the cord. Can I see that for a second? Greg glanced down. It's okay. No. It powers the speakers. It also has damaged insulation. Greg laughed softly. It worked yesterday. So did the brakes on plenty of cars before they failed. Several parents nearby stopped talking. I felt every pair of eyes shifting toward us. My father bent down, lifted the section trapped beneath the chair and turned it over. The outer jacket had split open, only about an inch, just enough to expose the inner insulation. Greg frowned. I didn't even notice that. My father reached over and unplugged it from the outlet. The music stopped instantly. The backyard fell silent. One little girl looked around confused. Someone muttered, "Seriously?" I walked across the lawn before my father could say another word. "Dad." He looked at me. "What?" "You can't just walk into somebody else's yard." "The cord needed to come out." "That wasn't your decision." "It became my decision when nobody else saw it." Greg held up a hand. "It's okay, Nathan." "No," I said, unable to stop myself. "It's not." I turned back toward my father. "Do you know what people are thinking right now?" He said nothing. "You did this my entire childhood." Laura had followed us over by then. She touched my arm gently. "Nathan." I pulled away. "No!" I had waited years to say it. "Do you know what they're going to call him?" My father said nothing. I pointed toward Owen, who was standing quietly beside his bicycle near our driveway. "The same thing they called me." Greg looked away. Laura said my name softly, but I barely heard her. "I finally got away from being your son," I said. "And now you're making him carry it too." The words hung between us. Even Greg looked away. For the first time since I was a boy, I wasn't angry because my father had embarrassed me. I was angry because I thought he was about to embarrass my son. My father looked past me toward Owen. His face softened for the briefest moment. Then it was gone. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost quiet enough that I nearly missed it. "Fear keeps people alive." I laughed once. It wasn't a happy sound. "So does letting people live." Neither of us moved. Greg picked up the damaged extension cord and examined it more closely. "I'll grab another one," he said. "No point arguing over a $20 cord." His wife nodded in agreement. "I'd rather replace it than wonder about it." Nobody apologized. Nobody thanked anyone. The music started again a few minutes later. The birthday party continued. Children laughed as though nothing had happened. My father walked back toward the guest house alone. He didn't look angry. He didn't look satisfied. He simply disappeared inside and closed the door behind him. That evening, I saw him sitting on the small porch outside the guest house. The untouched cup of coffee from that morning was still sitting beside him. For the first time in my life, I had said out loud what I had been carrying since I was a little boy. I thought it would make me feel lighter. Instead, it only made the silence between us heavier. The birthday party next door lasted longer than I expected. By early evening, the balloons had started to sag against the fence, and most of the younger children had been picked up. A few families stayed behind with paper plates balanced on their knees, while Greg Turner stood near the grill, talking with two other fathers from the neighborhood. From our kitchen window, I could still see the replacement extension cord running from the garage to the speaker near the patio. It was new, bright orange, undamaged. Martin had noticed it too. He had not said a word about it. That should have felt like progress. Instead, I kept watching him from across the room as he sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee he had barely touched. Laura was rinsing dishes at the sink. Owen was in the living room building something with plastic bricks. No one mentioned what had happened that afternoon. That was how families like ours survived most days. We stepped around things. A little after 8, Laura looked out the window and frowned. "Are they still using the garage outlet?" I glanced over. The music was still playing softly next door. Someone had moved one of the patio heaters closer to the open garage because the evening air had cooled. A strand of small lights hung along the side of the house. Martin stood up. I knew it before he said anything. "Dad," I said. He did not answer. He moved to the window and stood there, one hand resting against the curtain. For a long moment, he only watched. Then his shoulders tightened. "What?" I asked, already tired. He pointed. "That outlet cover is broken." I looked. From where I stood, I could barely see anything. "It's across the yard." It's cracked. You don't know that. He turned from the window. I know what I saw. I stepped between him and the back door. No. His eyes moved to mine. Nathan? No, you're not going over there again. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. They replaced the cord, I said. The party is almost over. Greg already listened to you once today. The outlet is damaged. You don't know that. I do. You think you do. Laura turned off the faucet. My father looked past me toward the window again. For the first time all week, I saw him hesitate. Not because he agreed with me, because he was trying. That almost made it worse. Leave it, I said quietly. He kept his eyes on the house next door. Dad. A few seconds passed. His hand was still on the back door. I could see him fighting himself. Not arguing, not moving, just standing there, looking at the Turner's garage as if staying inside took more effort than walking out. Then he stepped back from the door. All right. He sat down again. I should have felt relieved. I did not. Less than a minute later, the music cut out. At first, nobody moved. Then I saw a thin, gray line of smoke rise from the open side of the Turner's garage. Frank was already on his feet. This time, I did not stop him. He crossed the yard faster than I thought he could move with a bruised hip and a splinted wrist. I followed close behind, with Laura calling Owen to stay inside. Greg had just stepped into the garage when Frank reached him. Get everyone away from the house, Frank said. Greg blinked. What? Now. The smoke was thicker by then, curling along the ceiling of the garage and slipping out beneath the eaves. Someone screamed from the backyard. A woman grabbed two children by the shoulders and pulled them toward the lawn. Greg turned toward the patio. Amanda, he shouted, get the kids out front. Frank caught his arm. How many? Greg stared at him. How many children are still here? I don't know. 6, maybe 7. Count them. Nathan already called 911, Laura said behind me. I had not even realized she was there. Greg ran toward the yard. Martin moved to the side door of the garage and lowered his body before looking inside. Dad, don't! He ignored me. The smoke alarm inside the house began to scream. Greg came back pale. 5. Martin looked at him. What? We only have 5. Amanda Turner cried out from the lawn. Where's Sophie? The name changed everything. She was 7. Greg's youngest niece, a small girl with glasses who had spent most of the afternoon carrying a stuffed rabbit under one arm. Greg stepped toward the garage, but the smoke pushed him back immediately. Frank grabbed him by the shirt. No, you'll drop before you reach the door. My niece is in there. I know. Before I understood what he was doing, my father pulled his own jacket over his mouth and went in low through the side entrance. Not running, not charging, moving in a way that was careful and practiced, one hand feeling along the wall, his body kept beneath the smoke. For several seconds, I could not see him. The garage light flickered once and went out. Someone kept saying, oh my God, over and over. The first siren sounded in the distance. I moved toward the door. Laura grabbed my arm. Nathan, no. I pulled once, but she held tighter. Then Frank reappeared. He was coughing hard, bent almost double, with Sophie Turner held against his chest. Her face was streaked with soot. Her glasses were gone. She was crying, which was the best sound I had ever heard. Greg took her from him and stumbled backward onto the grass. Frank dropped to one knee. I reached him just as he tried to stand. Don't, I said. He pushed my hand away. Back wall, he coughed. Breaker panel. Tell them. The first engine pulled up before I could answer. Firefighters moved quickly, the way people do when they have done something 1,000 times but still know the next minute matters. One of them guided Frank to the curb and put an oxygen mask over his face. He tried to remove it. The firefighter held it in place. Leave it on, sir. Frank stopped fighting. Deputy Fire Marshal Victor Alvarez arrived after the flames were out. By then, the garage door was blackened, and the siding near the corner of the house had melted into warped strips. The damage looked both serious and strangely contained. Victor Alvarez spoke with Greg first, then Amanda, then the firefighters. Finally, he came over to where my father sat on the curb with a blanket around his shoulders. "Name?" My father looked up. "Frank Hayes?" Victor wrote it down. Then his pen stopped. He looked at my father more closely. "Frank Hayes?" My father's face changed before his voice did. "Yes." Victor studied him for another second. "Have we met?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Victor did not push. He only nodded and finished taking the statement. A few minutes later, an ambulance took my father back to Riverside for smoke inhalation. This time, I followed without hesitating. I thought that would be the end of the night. It was not. Long after midnight, while my father slept behind a curtain in the emergency department, Deputy Fire Marshal Alvarez sat alone in his office and entered Frank's name into an old incident database. The file came up slowly. A scanned report. A date from 23 years earlier. A house fire on Maple Street. Victor sat back in his chair. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not used in years. When the line connected, he said only one sentence. "Walter, I think I found Frank Hayes." The man on the other end was silent for so long that Victor checked whether the call had dropped. Then Walter Brooks said very quietly, "Is he alive?" I expected Deputy Fire Marshal Victor Alvarez to leave after the ambulance pulled away. He did not. When I returned to Riverside, he was already in the waiting area with a paper cup of coffee cooling between his hands. His jacket still smelled faintly of smoke. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. My father was behind a curtain in the emergency department, asleep after the doctors treated him for smoke inhalation. A nurse had said he would be fine, but they wanted to keep him overnight because of his age and the fall earlier that week. Victor stood when he saw me. "Mr. Hayes?" "Nathan," I said. He nodded once. "Nathan, how long has your father been like this?" I knew what he meant. "Like what?" Victor did not smile. "Watching everything." I looked toward the closed curtain. "As long as I can remember." He lowered his eyes for a moment, as if that answer had confirmed something he did not want confirmed. "Did he ever talk to you about Maple Street?" "No." The name meant nothing to me then. "Should it?" Victor looked past me toward my father's bed. "I thought he might have told you. My father doesn't tell people things." That was not bitterness, not entirely. It was simply the truth. Victor said nothing for a while. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out a business card. "If your father is willing to talk later, have him call me." I almost laughed. "He won't." "I know." The way he said it made me look at him more closely. Before I could ask another question, he walked toward the exit. I thought that would be the end of it. About an hour later, while I was sitting beside my father's bed, I heard voices in the hallway. One belonged to Victor. The other was older, lower, and rough around the edges. I did not mean to listen. Then I heard my father's name. "Frank Hayes," the older man said. There was a pause. "I told him it wasn't his fault," Victor answered quietly. "He never believed that?" "No." The hallway went silent. Then the older man asked, "Does he still check everything?" Victor did not answer right away. "He pulled a 7-year-old girl out of a smoke-filled garage tonight." The older man let out a breath. "Then yes, he still checks everything." I stood up. My father did not stir. I stepped into the hallway. Victor turned first. Beside him stood a man in his late 60s, maybe older, with broad shoulders and white hair cut short. He held a folded envelope in one hand. "Nathan Hayes?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm Walter Brooks." The name meant nothing to me. "I worked with your father." I waited for him to explain. He did not. He looked past me into the room where Frank lay sleeping.
"He looks older." "He is older," Walter nodded. "We all are." Victor touched the envelope in Walter's hand. "I found the old file." Walter brought what wasn't in the system. "What file?" I asked. Walter looked at Victor, then back at me. "The Ashcroft house fire," he said. I heard the words, but they did not connect to anything. Walter seemed to understand. "He never told you." It was not a question. "No." Walter handed me the envelope. "Read the report first." "Why?" "Because if I tell it wrong, you'll think I'm making your father into something he wasn't." I looked down at the envelope. My name was not on it. Neither was my father's. Only a photocopied case number written in black marker. Inside were 6 pages, old scans, poorly copied. A fire incident report from 23 years earlier. Maple Street, December 24th. The language was flat and official. Arrival time, weather conditions, point of origin, probable cause, structure type, occupants. I read the first page standing in the hallway, then the second. Then I had to sit down. Engine 4 arrived at 2117, heavy smoke visible from second floor. Mother and female juvenile located near rear bedroom. Male juvenile reported missing. Interior search attempted. Conditions deteriorated. I looked up. Walter was watching me. "Male juvenile," I said. Walter's mouth tightened. "Evan Cole, 9 years old." 9. The same age Owen was now. The page blurred for a second, and I had to blink hard before I could keep reading. The report said my father helped remove Rebecca Cole and her daughter from the rear of the house. It said a second search was attempted. It said crews were forced out because part of the upstairs hallway had collapsed. It said Evan Cole was later located in a front bedroom. It did not say what that meant. It did not have to. I turned the page. At the bottom, in a section marked Supplemental Notes, someone had typed a single line from my father's statement. "All preventable. Warning signs present prior to ignition." Below that, written by hand in the margin, were 4 words. "Should have seen sooner." I stared at the handwriting. I had seen it on grocery lists, birthday cards, receipts, checks, and labels on boxes in my father's garage. I knew it immediately. "That's his," I said. Walter nodded. For a while, none of us spoke. Then Walter sat down beside me. "The report can't tell you everything." I kept looking at those 4 words. "Then tell me what it leaves out." Walter folded his hands between his knees. "Rebecca Cole was still alive when they put her in the ambulance. Barely." Walter looked down at the floor. There was flour on her sleeve. I remember that because it didn't make sense to me at the time. Later, her husband told us she had been baking Christmas cookies when the smoke alarm went off. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes did not. She was burned, badly. Smoke did most of it. She couldn't see. I don't think she understood where she was. Victor stood a few feet away, silent. "She kept reaching," Walter said. "Not grabbing, just reaching, like she thought one of the kids was close enough to touch." I looked toward my father's curtain. Walter continued. "Your father climbed in beside her. He shouldn't have. Paramedics were trying to work, but he climbed in anyway and took her hand. I could picture it too easily. My father younger, stronger, still impossible to move once he had decided something. She kept asking for her children," Walter said. He swallowed once. "Not both their names, not full sentences, just..." He stopped. Then he said it quietly. "Both of them."
The hallway seemed to narrow around those words. She kept saying, "Please."
Both of them. I looked at the report again. Rebecca Cole, female adult, pronounced deceased at 2306. Did she know? I asked. Walter shook his head. No. I knew the answer before he said it. She didn't know Evan had already died. Walter looked down at his hands. No. My throat tightened. What did my father tell her? Walter closed his eyes for a moment. He told her he'd bring them to her. The words landed slowly, not like a shock, like weight being placed piece by piece into my chest. He promised her. Walter nodded. I knew he shouldn't. I wanted to stop him, but she was dying, Nathan. She was reaching for children she couldn't see. Your father was the only thing she had hold of. I looked at the curtain again. Behind it, my father slept with an oxygen tube beneath his nose. The same man who had ruined birthday parties, unplugged Christmas lights, watched delivery drivers through curtains, counted children at other people's cookouts. For the first time in my life, those memories did not change, but they shifted, only slightly, enough that I could not look at them the same way. What happened after? I asked. Walter took a long breath. They found Evan later. He did not describe it. I was grateful for that. Your father was outside when I came out. I didn't have to say anything. He looked at me and knew. Walter rubbed one hand across his mouth. I told him it wasn't his fault. I looked again at the handwritten words. Should have seen sooner. He didn't believe you. Walter shook his head. No, he never did. Across the hall, a machine beeped softly, the ordinary sound of a hospital doing ordinary things. Walter stood. I don't know what kind of father Frank was to you. I did not answer. He did not ask me to. I only know what followed him home. Then he left the envelope in my hands and walked down the hallway with Victor Alvarez beside him. I stayed there long after they were gone, sitting outside my father's room with 6 copied pages on my lap. For most of my life, I thought my father saw danger everywhere because he was strange. Now I wondered if he had simply never stopped seeing one house. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same 4 handwritten words at the bottom of the report. Should have seen sooner. I had spent my entire life believing my father looked for danger because he enjoyed making people uncomfortable. Now I wasn't so sure. Just after sunrise, I walked into the garage to get a screwdriver. For years, I had parked my lawnmower beside an old shelving unit without giving it a second thought. That morning, I noticed the red gasoline can sitting less than a foot away from the water heater. I stood there longer than I should have. Then I picked it up and moved it to the other side of the garage. I caught myself halfway through the motion. I actually laughed. I sound just like him, I muttered. Then the laugh went away. I hated that the thought had even crossed my mind. Understanding where my father's fear came from did not erase what growing up with him had felt like. Both things were true. I just did not know what to do with both of them yet. When I walked back into the house, Owen's electric scooter was charging near the laundry room. I unplugged it. A second later, I plugged it back in. Then unplugged it again. Laura watched the whole thing from the kitchen. You've been thinking about your dad. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I don't know what to think anymore. She dried her hands with a towel. Maybe you don't have to decide today. Around noon, someone knocked on the front door. It was Walter Brooks. He carried a small cardboard box sealed with faded packing tape. I've been meaning to get rid of this for years, he said. I just never knew who it belonged to anymore. He placed it gently on the dining room table. It was in your father's locker at Station 4. I looked at the box. He never went back? Walter shook his head. The day he retired, he walked out carrying nothing. After Walter left, I opened it slowly. There was no medal, no retirement plaque, no newspaper clipping about a heroic rescue. Just ordinary things. A worn fire helmet, a pair of smoke-stained gloves, an old flashlight with scratches along the handle, a pocket notebook. I opened the notebook expecting journal entries. Instead, every page looked almost the same. January 12th, Mrs. Jenkins, smoke detector battery replaced. February 3rd, Church Fellowship Hall, emergency exit blocked by storage boxes, reported to maintenance. March 18th, Little League Field, fire extinguisher expired, coach notified. April 6th, neighbor's garage, extension cord replaced. There were no opinions, no explanations, just dates, addresses, problems, solutions, page after page, year after year. The handwriting never changed, neither did the habit. I kept turning pages. Then I noticed something strange. Every year ended the same way. December 24th, nothing written, just a large red X across the page. No notes, no addresses, no reminders. Only the date and the mark. Every single year. I checked another notebook. The same thing, December 24th, a red X. Again and again and again. 23 years. 23 red X's. That evening I called Walter. What did my father do every Christmas Eve? Walter was quiet for a long moment. He never came to the station Christmas dinner. Where did he go? I don't know. You never asked? Walter sighed. Some questions belong to a man until he's ready to answer them. I looked down at the notebook in my lap. There was one last item inside the box. A folded Christmas card. No envelope, no stamp. The front showed a snow-covered church beneath a pale winter sky. Inside, only one sentence had been written. Rebecca, I couldn't keep my promise. I'm sorry. There was no signature, no date. The card had never been sent. I closed it carefully and placed it back in the box. For most of my life, I believed my father had spent every day looking for danger. Now it seemed more likely that he had spent every day trying to outrun one memory. And somehow, after 23 years, he was still losing. My father came home 2 days later. The doctors told him to take it easy for a while. He nodded as though he agreed. By the following morning, he was already replacing the batteries in the smoke detector inside the guest house. Some habits survived doctors. A week passed before either of us mentioned the fire. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Laura had taken Owen to a birthday party across town. The house felt strangely empty. I found my father sitting on the small porch outside the guest house, sanding the rough edge of a wooden birdhouse Owen had started building at school. He wasn't trying to fix it, only smooth one corner so a child wouldn't catch a splinter. I sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sandpaper moved slowly across the wood, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, I broke the silence. I met Walter. The sandpaper stopped. I know. He brought me your old things. My father nodded once. I figured he would. I read the report. He stared at the birdhouse. I know. Another long silence settled between us. The breeze carried the smell of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the street. Children laughed in the distance. Life continued as though nothing had changed. I looked at my father. You never told me. He ran his thumb across the edge of the wood. No. Why? He thought about the question for so long that I wondered if you would answer at all. When you were little, he said quietly. I thought if I never talked about it. He stopped. Maybe it would stay with me. I waited. I didn't want it following you. I looked toward the backyard where Owen usually left his soccer ball. It did. Those two words hung between us. My father closed his eyes, only for a second. When he opened them again, they looked older than I had ever noticed. I know. It was the first time in my life I had heard him admit something without defending it. I took a slow breath. Do you know what I remember about growing up? He didn't answer. I remember birthday parties ending early. I looked down at my hands. I remember kids laughing at school. I remember pretending not to hear them. I remember wishing... I stopped. The words caught somewhere in my throat.
Wishing you could just be like everyone else's dad.
He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set the birdhouse on the porch between us.
I'm sorry.
The words were almost too quiet to hear. I looked at him, not because I doubted what he had said, because I had never imagined hearing it.
I spent so much time trying to keep things from happening.
He stopped and rubbed one thumb along the edge of the birdhouse.
I missed what was already happening.
I looked at him. To me? He nodded.
To you.
The yard was silent. No explanations, no excuses. Just one old man admitting what he had failed to see. After a while, I asked the question that had followed me ever since Walter left the hospital.
Do you still see that house?
My father didn't ask which one. Every day. The answer came without hesitation. When I walk into a room, he looked toward the guest house smoke detector. I don't see what is. He paused.
I see what could become.
Another silence. This one felt different. Not uncomfortable, just honest.
I used to think you were angry all the time, I said.
He looked toward the guest house. I wasn't angry at you.
Then what were you?
His answer came after a long while. Late. It was such a simple sentence. 4 words. They explained nothing. And somehow, they explained everything. We sat there until the afternoon shadows stretched across the yard. Neither of us cried. Neither of us hugged. When Laura and Owen came home, Owen ran straight toward the porch carrying the birdhouse. "Grandpa!" He held it up proudly. "I painted it!" My father smiled, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. "It looks better than mine." Owen laughed. "You only fixed the corner." My father nodded. Sometimes that's enough. I looked at the two of them standing together. For the first time since I was a boy, I wasn't looking at the man who had embarrassed me. I was looking at a father who had carried one terrible night for 23 years and had finally set down a small part of its weight. 6 months passed. Life settled into something quieter. My father was still living in the guest house. His hip had healed. His wrist had healed. Some things never would. Every Sunday morning, he walked the neighborhood before most people were awake. Not because anyone asked him to, just because walking had become part of who he was. Sometimes he came home carrying a loose mailbox flag or a trash can lid that had blown into the street. Sometimes he came back with nothing at all. People had stopped avoiding him. They hadn't become close friends, but they no longer crossed the street when they saw him coming. Greg Turner even waved now. The replacement extension cord from his daughter's birthday party was still hanging neatly inside his garage. One Saturday afternoon, Owen came running into the backyard carrying a box almost as big as his chest. "Dad!" He dropped it onto the patio table. "Look what Mom bought!" I lifted the lid. A backyard fire pit. Inside the box sat bundles of firewood, roasting sticks, and a bag of marshmallows. Laura smiled. "I thought we'd invite Greg's family over tonight." I looked toward the guest house. My father was trimming a rose bush near the fence. He hadn't looked up. For a second, I almost said no.
Not because I thought anything would happen, because an old part of me expected my father to find a reason why it was a bad idea. Owen was already opening another box. "Dad, can I set it up?" "I'll help." We carried the fire pit onto the patio together. Owen reached for the bag of firewood. "I'll get the lighter." Before I could answer, my father walked over. He stopped beside us. No one spoke. He looked at the fire pit, then at the dry grass near the fence, then at the bucket sitting beside the garden hose. He bent down, picked up the empty bucket, filled it with water from the hose, and placed it quietly beside the fire pit. That was all. He didn't tell Owen what to do. He didn't tell me where to move it. He didn't inspect anything. He simply put the bucket there. Then he started walking back toward the guest house. "Dad?" He turned. I looked at the bucket. "Good idea." He nodded once. Nothing more. That evening, the Turners came over. The children roasted marshmallows. Greg laughed about something that had happened at work. Laura handed out hot chocolate. My father sat a little farther back than everyone else, listening more than talking. At one point, Owen picked up one of the roasting sticks and started running across the yard. I opened my mouth. "Owen!" The word stopped there. I took a breath instead. "Come here for a second." He walked over. I knelt beside him. "See these?" I said, pointing to the glowing ends of the firewood. "They stay hot even when they don't look hot." He nodded carefully. "So if you want to run around, let's put the stick down first." "Okay." He laid it beside the fire pit and ran back to the other children. No shouting, no embarrassment, just a conversation. When I looked up again, my father was watching me. For the first time in years, I saw something close to peace on his face. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the house, turning off lights. As I reached the hallway, a soft chirp echoed overhead. The smoke detector. Low battery. Without thinking, I walked into the closet, took out a fresh battery, and replaced it. My father happened to be standing in the doorway. He smiled faintly. "You heard it." I did. Neither of us said anything else. He went back outside. I stood alone beneath the smoke detector for another moment. My father happened to be standing in the doorway. He smiled faintly. "You heard it." I did. Owen called from the backyard. "Grandpa, the marshmallows are ready." My father looked at me. I looked at the smoke detector, then at the old battery in my hand. "Go ahead," I said. He went outside. I stood there a moment longer beneath the quiet ceiling. Then I threw the old battery away.